Hello and welcome to another episode of Protest and Promise. My name is Lisa Salazar and I'm the General Manager of the Youth Development Department. Each month we come together with members of the Olivia Mitchell Youth Council that are represented by each of the 15 council districts in the city of Los Angeles. And I'm excited to announce that we have two of our very own members here in studio with us today. We're also joined by two very special guests. Both Council President Krekorian is here representing Council District 2, and Councilmember Blumenfield from Council District 3. Thank you both for being with us today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us, Lisa.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
So before we jump in, let's give our youth council members an opportunity to introduce themselves. Let's start with Emma.
Hi, my name is Emma, and I am from CD2, and I'm excited to be here.
Gabriel.
And I'm Gabriela Nino Herrera, and I'm from CD7.
All right, well, welcome to Protest and Promise.
Thank you.
So just to get started, a little context about why we're here today. We, our youth council members have been tracking city council motions very closely, trying to study what is happening, what is the latest and greatest in city council, what policies are emerging, so that they can choose one to do their capstone project on, and eventually write up recommendations and share those with the committee chairs and see if they can be helpful in that way. So today's show, we're really trying to do three things. One is we're trying to help young people understand the policy-making process here in the city of Los Angeles. What does that look like? We're also hoping to talk a little bit more about how young people can engage in the civic process or be a part of the city's process and civic engagement. And there are other ways outside of just being a LA City Youth Council member. So we want to talk a little bit about that. And we also want to talk a little bit about how we can encourage more young people to register to vote and be active voters out there. So that's the context to the show. But before we get into that, we would love for each of you to spend a little time telling us a little bit about your job and what is your role with the City Council.
All right. Well, thank you, Lisa. Thanks for having us again. I'm Paul Krekorian. I'm the president of the City Council. As Emma knows, I represent the 2nd Council District, which is the East San Fernando Valley. And there are 15 members of the council. The members of the council select the president. And my role is, first of all, assigning chairs of all of our committees, which is a very important role. And Councilmember Boomfield is the chair of our Budget, Finance, and Innovation Committee, which is, one of our most important committees.
Absolutely.
I lead our meetings and help when there are challenging policy issues. Often I will get involved to try to help overcome some of the barriers to moving things forward into the council and allowing the council members to debate the issues. So right now, one of the things that I'm especially focused on is trying to restore public confidence in this institution, because of course the council was really shaken by a lot of recent scandals, and so priority number one is making sure that people feel engaged and feel that they have a say in what happens in the council. So I'm especially pleased to be able to be here with you and talk about that topic.
Fantastic, fantastic. Councilman Blumenfield.
So thank you. So I'm Bob Blumenfield, and I represent the West San Fernando Valley, Reseda, Winnetka, Canoga Park, Tarzana, Woodland Hills. On the council, I play a role as part of the leadership team with Council President on the Assistant Pro Tem, which means if the President is not able to chair the meeting for whatever reason or needs to take a break, I'll often take the gavel, so to speak, and run the meetings. Also, as part of the leadership team, trying to work to make things happen in the council and work to create compromises when there are sticky issues and we have members that are disagreeing on things. But as the chair of the Budget Committee, my primary role is to get our budget passed and to have it be a reflection as much as possible of the priorities of the council, of the city of Los Angeles, to have a balance. We must have a balanced budget. We cannot move forward with a deficit budget. But what that looks like is very tricky, and it's not a blank slate either, because there are a lot of pieces that are mandatory, that are special funds that have to go to one place or another. So in as much as it's about creating priorities and setting the spending, it's also a puzzle that needs to be fitted together with all of the different requirements and all the different pieces. And at the end of the day, we have to create something that at the very least will get 8 votes on the council.
Mm-hmm. Our youth council members have even been trained on the budget process, so they understand the process and the deadlines, and they crafted a budget value statement that was included with the youth development department. So they're learning a lot in this process. So thank you for that. And I think our youth council members have prepared some questions. So I don't know who wants to kick it off.
I can kick it off.
All right, Emma.
So you guys were talking about how the council functions and how it works. I was wondering if you could demystify that process. In AP Gov, in government, and in school, we tend to learn about the federal government, but we don't really learn about the importance of local governments such as the council. So how does the council compare or relate to the federal government? Like, the governor is the president, the council members are the Senate. How do those things relate?
It's a really good point. Most people actually don't learn very much about local government, either in school or anywhere else. And in many ways, local government impacts your life much more than the federal government does in terms of day-to-day issues, quality of life, and so on. We have more immediate impact than even the federal government. So it is a little hard to penetrate sometimes and figure out how it all works. But here in Los Angeles, as I mentioned, we have a 15-member city council. In some cities, the mayor is appointed by the council. We have a directly elected mayor, so we have a separate legislative branch and executive branch. Most of, in fact, virtually all of the city's policymaking is done by the council. It's often with the concurrence of the mayor, but we really drive the policy agenda of the city and represent the people. We're also very involved in land use decisions, and as Mr. Blumenfield mentioned, the budget, of course, is probably the biggest way that the council influences what happens in the city, even more than our policy-making process, because if we're not funding people to do the work, if we're not providing the resources necessary to be able to deliver services, those services are not going to happen.
I have a perspective as a council member, but prior to this, as was Council President Krekorian, I was an assembly member, and prior to that I worked in the Congress as a staff member. And they're all very similar in some ways, in that you're trying to craft policy. You have a legislative body and an executive that has a veto power, but they're a different branch, but they're also extremely different. Also, obviously, Congress and the state are bicameral, meaning you have an assembly and a Senate, or House and a Senate. We're unicameral. We're just one body. So things are more direct. They happen faster. The other big difference, what we do locally has so much more of a direct impact on people's immediate lives. The Congress and the state, they make big policy decisions that affect the country, the world, but we're deciding what's going to be built next door to your house, or what streets are going to be paved, or how many police officers there are going to be, or how are potholes going to be filled and streets going to be paved. These decisions often get people more worked up. We're more likely to get stopped in a supermarket as a council person and either patted on the back or yelled at or some version in between than your congressman or your state representative. So it's different. It's also, the other difference in some ways is, even though we're a legislative branch, the city of LA is a little bit unique in that we're kind of a hybrid. We are legislative and executive in some ways. Technically, there's an executive, but because of the way the council is structured, we have a lot more direct line authority and work with our departments and our department heads, which is also a very different experience going from being a pure legislator in the state to now working very closely with the departments on delivery of services, because the city is all about services, whereas the state and the federal is more about programs.
I think one other important thing that people need to understand about city government is that we have limited jurisdiction as well. The federal government touches just about everything. The state government pretty much as well. But municipal government does not. And a lot of times people lose sight of that, and they think every problem out there in society is somehow something that the city council can address, and it's not. There are some things, say mental health care or health care generally, that fall within the jurisdiction of the County of Los Angeles, not the City Council. Our schools are not the jurisdiction of the council. They're run by the school district. So there are a number of ways that we are constrained in the things that we are able to impact based on our jurisdiction.
Emma, thank you for that question, because I hadn't thought about it that way, that our local government is what is the closest to us and has the most immediate impact on our everyday lives. But we don't really study that in school. We study the federal government. So great question. Thank you. Gabriela.
I have a question. It could be a little personal, but me as an immigrant, I just came here to the country, and this space, LA, has received me in a beautiful way. But now that you mentioned some of the typical things that you do in your everyday and how it connects to the local government, all this, what events in your life or your journey to become who you are right now have impacted your journey and what you do, the policy that you make, all your decisions?
It's a great question, trying to think about all the things in your life that impact the decisions that you make, because we're all the sum total of our experiences, and not just our own personal experiences, but our family experiences. Most of us have that immigrant experience in our family. With me, it's not as direct. It wasn't the direct immigrant, but my grandmother immigrated, and then other grandparents and their parents immigrated. So that's part of the experience as well. But really, it's that sum total. I mean, I care deeply about the environment, and that's always been a passion in different jobs that I've held in my life, and whether it's I used to work Clean Water Action years ago, or working for Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, and so those things color, the decisions that we make today. Because a lot of times, as a council person, you need to think about a lot of different priorities, and part of it is your own experience, because you can't help that. That's the lens that you have. But you're also, as a representative of a larger group, you can't limit yourself to that. You really have to listen. And that's probably the most important experience I have is as a listener. And maybe I can trace that back to my parents, who were both in my mother was a social worker, my father was a psychiatrist. Big emphasis on listening, because to do your job right, you have to understand where your communities are coming from. And so it's not just about your own lens, but it's about being able to understand other people's lenses, who you represent, and bringing them into that conversation. And they don't always all agree.
Particularly when we represent over 250,000 people in each of our districts. Each of our districts are massive. They're bigger than most cities in the state of California. And so that need to listen and to maybe represent different interests and different constituencies within the district and as in the city as a whole is really important. I think, my grandparents were the immigrants in my family, and my grandfather sold melons on the side of the street when he first arrived here. And, my mom didn't graduate from high school. My dad didn't get an opportunity to get his education, but because he went off to fight in World War II with the Marine Corps. So I was the first one to get to go to college in my family. And yet, I grew up in the San Fernando Valley at a time when a family like mine could really provide an excellent life for their kids. I went to very good public schools. I, felt safe. Communities were clean. people were investing in the future, investing in the infrastructure that was needed and so on for the future. And I've always felt that I wanted to make sure that my kids have something like the same kind of opportunity that I had coming from that background, to be able to go on to college and law school and then get elected to office, and or whatever path they choose, but to be able to have the kind of life in our communities that every young person deserves to have.
So, great question. I mean, I see how like personal life experiences, your background, and then having the ability to listen to diverse folks in your community is really what's necessary to be a good policymaker, right? So that you're representing the whole. So not everyone will have the same exact life experiences or path. But listening to folks and really understanding like where those commonalities, identifying, we talk a lot about values, identifying those common values, and then using that sort of process for policy making is really important. Thank you for that question, Gabriela.
Yes, I was thinking about some of the things regarding the voting and how the youth is involved in the voting process. I feel like sometimes us as youth, we see these big decisions and we're like, oh, I don't want to take part of it. I don't feel like my voice is going to be heard. I don't feel like maybe I could have a good opinion, or maybe I could make the right decision. But we all at the end know that it's like a bigger effort, and us being part of the council has been incredible to know all these things and how it works. But I heard you talk about how some of the topics that you were passionate about, how it impacts the work you do. So regarding to that, I feel like if I'm looking at this person who is running for this position, I might not know a lot about them. I know about their policy, their ideas, but I don't know at the end who they are. I don't know who they are. I don't trust them, or maybe this. So I wanted to ask you, what are some of the topics or the things that you're passionate about that make you go through all this and having your job and make the best out of it every day?
The one issue that really sparked my interest in public service back when I was very young was protecting the environment. And that was at a time when, you know, in the 60s, when we had much more environmental, you know, challenge than we have now in terms of water quality and air quality and other things. And so that was something that really drove me. And I mentioned before the kind of upbringing I had in the Valley. So my dad had a small business, so helping to give people opportunity to succeed in our economy and do well for themselves and their families through you know, small business and having good jobs, really important to me. And gun violence has been another driving issue for me throughout my public life. So those are a few of the things that I care about a lot, and when I'm voting, I look for candidates who share those values as well.
And you know, I heard in your question there's sort of a hesitancy to make that decision about who to vote for because you don't know everything. But part of it is there's no right answer to who you elect, or even on a proposition, whether there's always going to be arguments on both sides.
Two sides of it.
And part of it is it's really the process itself is what makes democracy great, is that we are governed by the consent of the governed. And so it's important to not get caught up in that perfection of I have to know. I'm so worried. I don't want to vote for someone who's going to turn out to be a criminal or a crook or this or that, or who's going to fail me on one issue. Because the reality, too, is you're never going to find a candidate who agrees with you on every issue. And if you do find that candidate, then somebody's not telling the truth, because no two people have exactly the same views. So you want to really, what you look for in a candidate is someone who shares your overall sort of disposition, but who also, you know, has a heart and who cares and who's doing these things for the right reason. And with that, you can't go wrong, even if you're going to disagree with somebody at some point down the road. It's also important, I think a lot of people get soured on politics when someone that they supported doesn't agree with them on every single issue. Yeah. and they don't realize that, well, wait a second, this person represents 250,000 people, bigger, as you mentioned before, an area that's bigger than 99% of the cities in America. Of course they're not going to agree with every single person on every single issue. So it's making sure that you don't get too caught up. The perfect is the enemy of the good. You've heard that expression. Actually, trace it back. It goes back to Voltaire. But it's important in governing and in politics as well that you try to be part of it. And it's more important to be part of it than to be right sometimes. And because otherwise you get caught up in it. And then the other piece is again, there is no absolute right. It really is. It's what the direction that we go is sort of being pulled in multiple directions, and then sort of the Venn diagram of where you end up, or what the most people are supporting.
One of the challenges that you have in your generation is so much of your information comes from social media. And to Mr. Blumenfield's point about no candidate ever being perfect, social media has a tendency to make things very black and white. You're either, perfect or you're evil. And that's almost never the case in either case. So I think one of the challenges of your generation is going to be to penetrate through some of that and to not get caught up in the generation of rage that happens on social media, and think about, who is the closest to your own values. And the one thing is, you must vote. You must always vote. You must not be deterred from voting by this, because government responds to those who show up. And whether it's voting, whether it's meeting your elected officials, whether it's communicating with them, you must show up or you will be left behind.
Public
And
comment.
that's just really critical.
Great advice. I mean, I think that's, because you said we don't know these people, but someone told me a long time ago, don't vote for a person, vote for the policies that are most important to you. So decide for yourself, what is the 1, 2, 3 most important policy areas, and who of the candidates is supportive of your view on that particular policy, and vote that way. So great advice. Thank you for that so much. I think we have time for maybe one more question, Emma.
Yeah, so this is going to be a twofold. First of all, we're talking about civic engagement, and I think voting is the epitome of civic engagement. So the first part is, we hear this statement, vote, vote, vote. But how do we vote? Can you tell our viewers how they can register to vote, what they can do to vote, how they figure out what candidates to vote for, where do we do that research? Because I think a lot of the problem is we get overwhelmed with voting, and the process is so mystical, and I think it'd be really helpful to demystify that process. And then the second part of the question is, after voting, how do we get involved, right? We talked about public comment. You talked about Council President Krekorian, how you interned. Are there any opportunities that you're aware of that someone like me could get involved in aside from the council?
Whole bunch there.
Yeah. That's more than 2 parts.
Let me throw one thing out, just so that folks know that you can find out everything you need to know about voting in Los Angeles by going to lavote.gov. lavote.gov is your one-stop shop on how to register, where to vote, get the ballot measures, all of that. So that information is available.
It's important that voting is not the be-all and end-all. It is part of the process. If for government to work well, there needs to be accountability. And it means that folks ideally are not just focused on election day, but they're focused on the before and the after. Because without that, the vote is less meaningful. And if you're just focused on the one vote, then you forget all the other 365 days of the year when policy is really being made. So I would urge you, yes, everyone needs to vote, but also think about those next questions that you were asking. Is how do we get involved as a citizen? And there are lots of ways. You touched on a few. Obviously, interning, working as staff. Those are very direct ways to do it. And a lot of my staff are young people, and a lot of, I was staff on Capitol Hill as a young person. It's a great way to get involved, but it's not the only way. Whether you care about an issue, you can be involved in the numerous organizations, nonprofits that are engaged in that issue. If it's the environment, there's lots of environmental groups that you can be part of. Campaigns are a great way. My daughter's your age. She just turned 18. She had a wonderful experience. She volunteered outside of me. I didn't set this up. She volunteered on Mayor Bass's campaign and was part of the Youth for Bass campaign and part of their arts committee, and really found that very meaningful. And you know, campaigns are takers. Anybody who wants to lend an hour, they're gonna take your time and your energy. It's a great way to engage. Commissions, appointments are also good ways that in the city of LA we have lots of city commissions that people can get involved with. And a lot of us council members have our own sort of mini commissions. I have what I call Bobcats, community action teams. And from Bob's, they're Bobcats.
That's great.
But they're on domestic violence, on youth, on emergency preparedness, lots of different groups that come together to get things done in the district. And of course, in LA, we have this wonderful neighborhood council system where there are literally youth members on those neighborhood councils. That's another great way to engage locally. There's so many ways, and part of it starts with just, you know, pick up the newspaper.
Yes.
And read the newspaper, see what's happening. That's sort of this first step, is to just be interested and engaged, and then everything else kind of flows from there. Because when you get interested and engaged, you'll also sometimes get outraged and motivated. And you'll also, you know, you'll see how all the connections are made. But really, it's being a citizen and, you know, a participant in democracy. You know, really what I'm saying, it's about caring about your neighbors and your community and engaging and learning about what's happening. And once you start doing it, it's kind of addictive. You start reading the newspaper, then you want to see what's happening, then you start calling up folks to see, you know, how to get involved. And there are people in democracy, people always want your time and energy. And as a young person, it's one of the greatest things that you have. You have sort of often more time and energy than folks who are older with kids. And that's also creates great opportunity.
And that takes effort. It takes effort to learn about issues, and you should put that effort in, because it will set you apart from the vast majority of people, and it will make you a leader. And your participation in the Youth Council is already giving you a great head start in doing that. But for too many people, including, you know, adults who've been voting for years, they don't know very much about the issues, haven't really read the newspaper and followed things. They just go based on what they've heard. And so if you're providing actual useful information to people and rallying them around whatever your cause is based on that information, you can be enormously impactful in shaping things, as Mr. Blumenfield said, between elections. No matter who gets elected, you can still shape outcomes based on your willingness to be engaged like that.
So what an amazing conversation. I want to thank Council President Krekorian and Councilmember Blumenfield. I want to thank our youth council members, Gabriela and Emma, for just a great, great conversation. And I also want to remind our audience that you can learn everything you need to know about voting here in Los Angeles by going to lavote.gov. All the information you need is there on how to register, how to vote, where your polling places are, and the information that is available online. So again, thank you all. Thank you. I am Lisa Salazar, General Manager of the Youth Development Department, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Protest and Promise.